Today on UVA Legends podcast, I got Wally Walker, NBA legend as a forward and executive. Down in UVA, we called him Wonderful Wally or Wally Wonder. But anyway, thanks, Wally, for joining me.
Yeah, Julian, good to be with you. Thank you.
I want to give the broad sketches of your career, which is pretty amazing. Okay. You one of the really first big UVA recruits in any sport. Came to UVA when it wasn't known as a sports program at all. Led us to the ACC Championship in 1976, which was still legendary. I'm sure people still ask you about it today.
Yeah, I'm amazed by that. The 50 years almost have passed, and people still seem to claim they were there, or remember it clearly, and I'm flattered by that.
Oh yeah, I had the game on. My history teacher had the game on in our class. We were watching it. Well, I was 10 years old. It's just a huge moment. And then had an 8-year NBA career. Won 2 rings for Portland and also for Seattle. Mm-hmm. Then went back to Stanford, got your MBA, opened Walker Capital. But then the NBA called you back, and you were executive, a GM and president of the Seahawks for 12 years. And you were runner-up for Executive of the Year, I believe, in '98.
Right.
Yeah. Then meanwhile, you were on the board of visitors at UVA. And then you came back to the business world, opened Hana Road Capital. I believe I pronounced that right.
Correct. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you still do that today. It's pretty amazing a record you have.
Well, thank you. It's been a great run. I can't say that it was planned as a progression the way it turned out, but I enjoyed every stop along the way, and still am, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a busy schedule because we had to schedule around Wall Street, and today is a federal holiday. How would you compare evaluating stocks and companies to evaluating NBA talent? Do you enjoy both, or is it a much different?
Enjoy both. The variability amongst players, particularly when you're trying to evaluate and project 10 years forward for an 18, 19-year-old is trickier. I can't tell you how many guys you see who, look good in a workout and even competing against their peers, particularly younger players, but then you throw them in with some older guys or in an NBA environment, and this goes for international players too, that all of a sudden, they blow a gasket when they're in a different level of competition. So there's that. Of course, the converse is also true. Some guys you see, they're fine. Maybe they're okay in a workout. Then you put them in a game, and man, they compete. So you do your best to try to judge and project them out, 3, 5, 10 years and where they'll come. But there is some commonality with that as you're looking at companies, because productivity does tend to breed success and productivity down the road too. So you can't just look at just all the intangibles and try to project them. You look at what they've actually done, and that matters.
Yeah, and I'm sure your MBA, your MBA and your business experience helped you as an MBA executive.
There were some things in the decision-making process that certainly helped. There are also some things, I've made this joke many times over the years. My friends, I'm sure roll their eyes, they've heard the same stories multiple times, where I say, describe a situation that I had, and my tagline is, we never had this case in business school. We didn't study this one. I was paying a lot of tuition. We never had this one. And there are almost always, if not always, people issues that by definition you really can't have a case study on, but they come up, and like any team that's successful at the professional level, probably at any level for that matter, has got somebody smoothing over, working hard, doing a good job on the people issues. Because even I was fortunate to be on the best teams in the world. I was the president of a team in Seattle that went to the finals, but I was also president of a WNBA team that won the championship. And all those teams had issues, but the management, sometimes all the way up to the owner, did a good job of dealing with the issues, so that the players and people who were having a problem felt good about it.
Yeah. Well, getting back to basketball for a minute, I talked to Bob Dandridge, a guy you played against in the 78 and 79 World Championship. And you guys are very similar in that you guys are pure threes. There's no doubt about what position you guys played.
Right.
And you guys both could slash, great mid-range games, can score in transition, great finishers in traffic. But it's interesting. Neither one of you guys have parallels in today's game. And I asked Bobby this. What kind of player would Wally Walker have been in today's game, where it's mostly 3-pointers and dunks? And you didn't you played with a three-point stripe, I think 3 seasons.
Came in midway through my NBA career. Unfortunately, we didn't have it in college when I played.
Yeah.
So I look out there with envy. That or the dunk. I was a decent dunker and didn't have that opportunity until getting to the pros. I would have adjusted, which I did later in my NBA career, to the three-point shot. I actually was a better long-range shooter earlier in my career, particularly at UVA, even though they only counted for 2. And in my range, it shrunk a little bit because it just wasn't used, and I became more of a mid-range player. But I did get really good at the three-point shot in my last year in Houston. The coach, Bill Fitch, after the first 17 games I was a starter, and Ralph was on that team as a center. I barely played after that, but I got good. And when I did get in the game, I rare appearances, I'd make a few. So I would have adjusted. I really like today's style. I would have loved to have played in it because just have more room to operate. With the spacing is an overused term, but in fact, because of three-point shot, you got to space up, and the people who have the ball with all the pick and roll have a lot more room to operate and get in the paint without meeting 4 or 6 guys before they get there.
Yeah, it was a much more physical game when you played. I think you would have a lot more room to slash these days and get to the
hole. And more tightly packed. In fact, I'm a little stunned when I go back and look at our video of the grainy black and white back when we played. You see how most of us were not too far, either inside the key or just outside in a small area.
Yeah. So, well, I know you're from Millersville, Pennsylvania, which is in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Yep.
I'm one of the few people who actually has been there before. A few people that you
come on, no way.
Yeah. Well, so Millersville is a big bicycling race, a big road race on the bicycle scene in
really?
in the DC, Baltimore, Southern Pennsylvania area. So I've been to Millersville, Farmersville, Brownstown. All those little towns have road races, and a lot of the Mennonites or Amish folks come out and they support us. So it's a big deal. I think it started there around the mid '90s, and it's a really big deal now.
Well, I'm clearly not familiar, but I haven't been there much in almost 50 years. So there's that. Although I'm going back high school reunion this fall, so I stay in touch with my high school teammates, and that'll be a hoot.
Yeah. Well, what was Millersville like growing up? Were your parents from there as well?
No, they were from Pennsylvania. They were from even smaller towns. Millersville was a town of about 5,000, but it's a college town. And my father was a history professor at the college, and it was an idyllic place to grow up. It was a small town near Lancaster, which is, it's a city, some people call it a city there, of about 60,000 in Lancaster County. But it's mostly around Lancaster, other than the college town in which I grew up, is a rural agricultural area. The Amish were on the other side of Lancaster. You mentioned Mennonites. There were many in our school district. And so it was an area where people really, worshipped as well. They were devout in their religion, but they also were very devout in taking care of their farmland and how they treated that. And farming was a huge part of our local economy. So you had a dichotomy is not quite the right word, but it sort of captures it between the college-based folks in a small town and the close surrounding area. There's a little corporate base, but I would say, a good chunk of our high school body and my high school teams were guys straight off the farm.
Yeah. Well, the first time I'd ever heard the word Millersville was a guy you played against in the 1978 World Championship. I think his name was Phil Walker. He was on the Bullets team. He played for Millersville State. And I remember that. And the Bullets always drafted guys from small schools. They got Rick Mahorn. They always were able to get these. They had Joe Pace. They always were able to get these guys from these small schools. And I remember Phil Walker never played too much, but he was a talented guy. He just never worked out.
Well, he was the all-time leading scorer in my little hometown school.
That's right.
And so I knew him. When I would go back in the summer, we would play. He was a really talented guy. And it was funny, he got drafted and Millersville came across, and Millersville being as small as it is, I was just it was a year or two in the NBA, I guess just one. And somebody said, well, geez, we didn't know Wally's brother, played at Millersville State. Well, of course, he wasn't my brother. Phil Walker's black. And so it was a funny little aside. And anyway, he's had a very successful career as an executive after winning an NBA title with the Bullets. And I haven't talked to him, but I hear about him because I know he's in Philly.
Yeah, he was very much a fan favorite. So whenever he got in the game, he did well. But, NBA, it's often a numbers game.
Well, he was a 6'1" guy. And by the way, going back those days, the rosters got cut from 12 to 11 in 1977. That was the catalyst for my getting traded from Portland to Seattle. So there were only 22 teams, 11 roster spots, no injured list, no, whatever they're calling the players that move up and down these days. So there were 232 NBA jobs. That was it. So a lot of really good players, Phil Walker being one, my teammate Billy Langlow being another, who, in later years when the rosters expanded and teams expanded, would have had longer NBA careers. Just it was that hard.
Yeah, we'll get back to this, but not only did the rosters shrink, you also lost a whole bunch of pro teams when the ABA folded, and only four teams came over to the NBA.
Yeah, that was after my senior year. There was a time in June of 1976 when my agent was talking to at that time they were the New York Nets. The Nets were interested in me, and the ABA was still viable. Well, a month later, it folded, and as you mentioned, those four teams became NBA teams.
Right. So it's a whole bunch of jobs were done, and then the NBA had much more leverage over negotiations with the players.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
My year, I'm not embittered by this. I felt like I made all the money in the world, and guys, it's great what's happening to the prosperity of the league now. But my year, the 76 draft was the first time ever that the wages that we were paid dropped from the year before. They went up subsequent to that in future years, and it was all good. But because of the leagues merging, it was a monopoly.
Yeah, but I did an interview with Pat Toomey. You might not remember Pat. He's from around here, and he played football and basketball at Vanderbilt, but he was a Cowboy leading rusher in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great guy, great storyteller. He actually wrote the book on any given Sunday that became the movie Any Given Sunday. But anyway, he told me he's making $15,000 a year for the Cowboys. He could have made more as an engineer, but he was playing. And then when the WFL came out, I mean, he tripled his salary. So it was almost like he had to take it seriously. He ended up not going because I guess the Cowboys matched. But some of the guys had to go because it was such a great opportunity for the players.
Well, the Virginia great Buzzy Wilkinson told me the story when he came out. Of course, he played in the 50s at UVA, still the all-time leading average score by average. That he would make more money. He was drafted. I think there were only 8 NBA teams at that point in the 50s. That he got paid more as a banker in West Virginia, where he's from, than he would have going to the Celtics.
Yeah, can you imagine you go to Wall Street?
Yeah.
So, well, getting back to Millersville, where did you learn how to play basketball? Is it Pennsylvania's funny because I've done interviews with lots of Pennsylvania guys who are great basketball players, and they always tell me there wasn't lots of great basketball in Pennsylvania. So,
yeah, I heard part of your interview with my good friend Barry Parkhill, which was terrific, and I heard him say that he came from the worst high school league in the country, and I hate to differ with Barry because he's a great friend and guy. But I think my league was the worst league in the country. It was we didn't have much talent. There weren't guys going to college to play. There was nobody going to D1, let alone. I mean, I said in high school at one point, I hope to be an NBA player. I was hooted at, derided. That's never going to happen. One, I didn't look or show any evidence of being an NBA talent. It just never happened from our area. But in the case of Millersville, it was a college town. So there was a college gym, and at that time it was an NAIA school, but it had good teams, good players. And I would go down to that little college gym and try to get in the game. And I didn't belong in the game because when I first started going down there, I weighed about 120 pounds. But sometimes there are only 9 guys or an odd number, and you have to let me play. And, I got pushed around and beat up and shots blocked. But I kept going back. I kept coming back. And after a while, they kind of said, the young boy, he's back. We didn't think he'd be back, And there was one guy in particular, and I stay in touch with him, named Ernie Lowe, who took me under his wing. And he would, let me play in a game when I wouldn't play. He was a guy from Philly. And if somebody, I remember clearly, I was either sophomore or junior in high school. I accidentally hit a guy with an elbow, another Philly guy. And I went to the ground because I tripped over him, and I was on the floor, totally vulnerable. This guy raised his fist to, because he was mad at me. And Ernie jumped in, intervened, saved me, frankly. So anyway, he was that kind of mentor. In a gym, in a pickup situation, there's always a guy that everyone respects, that has a final word on a foul call or what teams are picked or who gets the next run. Ernie was that guy. And by the way, a funny small world story, as an aside, and Ernie did not know the connection whatsoever because I was just showing up in the gym. He was a student of my father. And my father, Ernie was the first from his family to go to college. And Ernie tells the story, first day of class he went, and that summer, and he sat in the front row because his father told him, I want you, listen, son, if you mess this up, your brothers and sisters aren't going to be able to go to college like you have this opportunity. So Ernie tells the story, he sat in the front row, wrote down every word the professor was saying, every preposition. He was going to get it right. He was dialed in. And the professor called him up afterwards and said, son, I was watching you in class. You look really nervous. And Ernie, as he tells the story, when he gets called up by the professor, said, oh, geez, they figured me out. And, they know I don't belong here. That was what was going on in his mind. Well, the professor said to him after this class, you're new here, and why don't you just come see me every week? We'll just talk, where you are, how you're doing, how's it going? You're going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Well, that professor was my dad. Wow. But at the same time, I'm in the gym, getting my butt kicked, and Ernie's helped me out, but he didn't know the connection. So it was a total small world, small town, but maybe had a fateful element to it. And anyway, I love the story. Literally, I didn't know that story about my dad saying that to Ernie until in the last 5 years. So this is how many years later. And he's been a very successful guy too, back in Philadelphia.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great story. Well, how about your dad? Was your dad an athlete?
He wasn't. He loved it. He was always around it. I had two older brothers that didn't play high school sports.
Wow.
And they were big fans. And, I was always exposed to it. My brothers coached me. My brother Sam was my baseball coach. And when my dad assistant coach, when I was 10 years old in their little town there. So they were always supportive, but didn't play.
Wow. Well, who were your earliest role models in basketball? So you've been high school about 71. So I guess the big players were like Bill Bradley and Earl Monroe, the Knicks.
Yeah, well, growing up, my hometown, if you just drew a corner, is about equidistant from Philadelphia and Baltimore. And of course, we didn't have cable. No one had cable back in those days. But I could get both the Bullets games and the 76ers games. So I watched a lot of them. So I grew up particularly loving those Bullets teams from the late 60s, early 70s. Earl Monroe, Gus Johnson. People don't remember Gus Johnson. What an incredible player he was. And then either the Sixers or Bullets would come play a preseason game in Lancaster every year. So I used to always go to that. I can remember Jack Marin having 30-some in a game for the Bullets on that team. Wes Unseld, in I guess it was 67, 68, was Rookie of the Year and MVP. That's an incredible accomplishment. May never happen again, probably won't. But then after my senior year in high school, I worked at Wes's camp. And then we're, fast forward, 20 plus years after that, 25 years, we're general managers in the NBA. So we're talking to each other. So, and by the way, again, I'm Millersville, Pennsylvania. I'm a high school kid. I'm with the NBA All-Pro Wes Unseld. He treated me like an NBA guy. He was so nice and respectful working at his camp, which was also his partner in that was Kevin Lockery. And so those guys were both and became lifelong friends, and enormous respect for those guys.
Yeah, I am a Bullets fan, I guess, fan today because, too often in pro sports, they fire coaches after one bad season. I love the way Poland, first of all, he didn't rely on Washington to pay for his stadium. He built it himself, and he developed the whole area of DC, all because they put Capital One, what's now Capital One there. But Wes, he struggled. His team struggled when he was general manager and when he was coach as well. And I thought he was a good coach. I thought he had no talent. I thought we had some bad luck, and I was so glad that they never fired him because I was so loyal to him because of that 1978 world title. And to me, loyalty means something. I enjoy that in sports. I would like to win every year, but I like to cheer for my guys.
Well, I don't know the particulars of Wes's tenure there with the Bulls and Wizards for that matter, but he was a fantastic guy, and he was a big loss when we lost him, in the recent past. But I was so pleased to see how people honored his legacy and what he done for the game and for wherever he was, going back to Louisville and before.
Yeah, he was definitely a trailblazer. So, well, we talked a little bit offline about your Millersville team getting together. It's not Millersville High School. It's called something else, I believe.
Penn Manor High School, Millersville, Pennsylvania. Yeah,
that's right. But you guys are getting together soon. So what kind of high school?
I've got a big high school reunion coming up in September, and I don't get back there so much anymore, living in Seattle as I do. But I talked to one of my teammates over the weekend. We're going to make a long weekend of it, so I get caught up. But I do stay in touch with my high school teammates and coach. Harry Fry was the coach of the team that won the county championship in 71 72, and he's still healthy and doing well. And the 71 team, we only had 9 guys on the team. No, literally. And the reason we did was because to scrimmage, we needed a 10th, and Harry was our 10th. He was still a really good player. He was in his early 30s. So he'd jump in, we'd go 5-on-5. I wish he could have played with us. We would have won the state championship, but he kept 9, so he would get in those runs.
Was it really prestigious to coach in that area? Like, because Pennsylvania's a wrestling state, love their football. Philadelphia's a huge basketball city, but in some parts of the country, like I talked to Jeff Jones, his dad was a coach, a high school coach. Being a high school coach in a small town is huge. Did it have that kind of gravitas?
I would say I'm not sure I'm the best judge since I was just a kid, as a player. But basketball, it was followed, and because our team was good, we certainly, our gym was packed, and we were maybe those couple of years a big deal locally. But it wasn't a great basketball area. It was Manhunt Central High School was in our league. That was a legendary wrestling program. Won I don't know how many consecutive state matches or wrestling matches, but was some kind of national record. And then baseball. I did play high school baseball too. It was a great area. I played on the varsity baseball team. I was up and down between there and JV. My first start was against a school called Donegal. And that pitcher, in my first at bat as a varsity player, and my first start as a pitcher against the same guy, was a guy who went on to win, is in the Hall of Fame and was a Cy Young winner, a guy named Bruce Sutter, the great reliever. So I was up the plate. And at this point, I wasn't a good hitter anyway. I was strictly a pitcher. I never saw a pitch. I heard it, but I never saw one. I lost that game, but then the following summer in the American Legion, I did know hit his team. So I was a decent pitcher.
So with your size, probably pretty imposing on the mound there. Was there talk of you playing at the next level in baseball too, or were you always going to be a basketball player?
There were scouts at all my games starting that summer in American Legion because I did well there, and then the following spring, which was my junior year of high school, there were always scouts there. But then the following, I prefer basketball. I love basketball, and in my junior year when I did make the varsity, we were good. I loved it. So I chose not even to play that following summer after being the pitcher of the year, as a 16-year-old the year before, just to concentrate on my basketball. And that was what my heart was telling me. It was the right call.
Yeah. Well, when did you start becoming a prospect? And when did you first get on UVA's radar?
Well, again, get back to my area and me, I was so clueless that the big deal nationally, and particularly in Pennsylvania back then, was the 5-star basketball camp. Mm-hmm. Top prospects went to Howard Garfinkel's 5-star camp, which was in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, which in Pennsylvania, east is east and west is west. I didn't even know anything about it. I never heard, so I didn't go to it. So where coaches might have seen me typically, they did, because there I was. But so after my junior year in high school, I go work at a camp at Gettysburg College. I don't remember the conduit, why I got that counseling job. And by the way, going back further than that, I was a camper, as was Barry Parkhill and Gus Gerard, at Camp Gettysburg when I was in junior high, which was Coach Gibson, Bill Gibson's camp. So I knew, he didn't know who I was. I was a skinny little nobody. But I knew who he was because he was running this camp I went to for 3 summers. But I'm working at Gettysburg College, and as we always happens at camps, the counselors play at night. It's a large part of the reason why he took those jobs. And on the camp staff that week was the coach at Lebanon Valley College, another small college in central Pennsylvania, named Roger Gackler. Now, Coach Gackler's actually won the Division III national championship at Lebanon Valley. His star players and the guy named Donnie Johnson, a small college All-American. Anyway, so Coach Gackler was there, and he was a young coach, and he would play with us at night. So anyway, I I was who I was. And so again, off the radar, I wasn't hearing from really much of anybody. But he knew Coach Gibson from the Pennsylvania Ties. So that summer, that would have been June of 1971. He calls Coach Gibson and says, "You need to come up and see this guy. I'm telling you, he's good." And Coach Gibson's like, I've never heard of it. And Coach Gibson, I know. So Coach Gibson came up to see me. It was really the first major program come and visit me in Millersville, but they still didn't see me play. So they didn't offer me a scholarship. But I went for a visit. That fall. And by this time, word had gotten out a little bit. I played in a little tournament in New York City later that summer and had done well. So, I heard from a couple other, kind of bigger programs, but it was more William & Mary and Richmond and Penn State and, schools that weren't, good, but not upper echelon schools at this point. So then I go for a visit. I meet the guys. I like them all. Barry Parkfield, Gus Williams, I mentioned them, but the players, but still no offer. So I can remember we did a scrimmage before we had a regular season game. It was Thanksgiving break, my senior year, and UVA sent up Terry Truax, who was assistant coach. He was a first-year assistant coach at UVA at that time, to see me play because they recruit me. A lot of time's been spent. They don't know, and I don't know if I'm good enough, frankly. So he comes up to this scrimmage in our high school gym. I have a clear memory of it, and I averaged 33 as a high school senior. And this scrimmage, I know I had at least 40. And there's nobody in the gym. I mean, it's a close scrimmage. So the scrimmage is over, and Coach Truex, again, you can see everybody in the gym. I see him coming down, and he's kind of excitedly shaking my hand. So anyway, I think it was the Friday after Thanksgiving. On Monday, I got an offer from UVA. They'd see me play. I got an offer. So then after that, word got out. So I schools I hadn't heard from now were coming to see me, and I had offers from, the big guys, Duke and Penn at that time. Chuck Daly was a coach, was a great program, was a Final Four team, and North Carolina got in a little later, but they came in aggressively when they got in later my senior year.
Yeah, so I saw your great interview on the tournament, the ACC special. That was
thank
awesome.
you. That was fun to reminisce.
Yeah, it was great hearing all you guys. I mean, Jeff Jones or Ivoroni. There's so many great other schools. Gene Banks, guys I really hadn't heard from in a while. I mean, you've been on TV, but the other guys, maybe not so much. But you talked about going to Carolina and you fell in love with the grounds. And when you think about it, going to UVA, you were the focal point. I mean, Barry was there when you first got there, and Gus was there. Gus was also there as well, but you were going to be a focal point. If you were to go to Carolina, there was Mitch Kupchak, there was Kesters.
He wasn't there yet, but Bobby Jones was already there.
Bobby Jones was there.
Bobby Jones now in the Hall of Fame.
There was somebody.
By the way, 72 when they were still recruiting me, the spring 72, they went to the Final Four.
That's right.
I had made up my mind, and I liked them both, but there was a team I was choosing between UVA that had kind of come out of nowhere to have a really good year, led by Barry, and UNC with Bob McAfee was there, although he ended up entering the draft then after that year, and an established program in Carolina that was at the Final Four.
Yeah, but you think about it, at UVA, you had to take a lot of big shots. You were the go-to man. At Carolina, you would have had to share the ball. I mean, you still would have done great. You still earned first team All ACC, even though they didn't give it to you. But you would have had to be in a team concept where you had to pass 5 times. Do you think that your development would have been any different there than it was at UVA?
Well, it certainly could have been, and you never know. But what did happen, and because Carolina's bringing guys in, all the time in a way. At that point, UVA was not. I got hurt. I really wasn't very healthy my sophomore and junior year because of my knee issues. 2 operations before my second year, and I played. And I played fine. I had some good games, but I wasn't consistent. And then another one before my third, and my knee was just always swollen. I had to get drained every week. I mean, nowadays they never let a player play with what I was going through, but those are different times, and I'm not blaming anybody. It's just reality, and I wanted to play, but where I was physically, and then Coach Holland comes in, that for my junior year, I'm sure he's looking at me like, I heard you were good and athletic. And I don't say, I'm dragging around, and knee is blowing up all the time. And again, I had some decent games, but it just, I didn't sustain them very well. I can blame it on the knee, but the knee was bad. So I usually could have gotten lost in a program that was bringing in talent, more talent than UVA had at that point every year. And certainly North Carolina was like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely glad you made the right decision.
Well, me too. It was absolutely the right call. I love UVA, and it's not to denigrate North Carolina, the program they've had, but UVA is a special place.
Yeah. Well, I don't know much about Bill Gibson. I asked Coach McKegg and Barry a little bit about him. I got a little bit of sense of him. What was his style? What was Coach Gibson like as a coach?
He was a really good at adapting and adjusting. For instance, my recollection comes right to mind since we're talking about North Carolina. We play at North Carolina. Then it was my second start as a freshman at UVA. When freshmen became eligible that year, which time I was being recruited, it wasn't clear that I was going to be a varsity player at the time you played on the freshman team. So we go down to play there. And again, they've got a team that's really good. Previous year Final Four and very talented and bigger, everyone's bigger than we were. I was playing power forward, weighed 185. Gus was their center at 190. We both jumped pretty well. Jim Hobgood was 6'4", was our 3-man. So, but we were skilled. We could shoot and score. So, and Carolina used to press full court all the time. Coach Gibson set up, a really clever way to attack their press, get it in quickly, get it up. And we had a layup drill going in a game at North. And then Barry, being the great point guard that he was, and we also did kind of a lob play, not like the lob plays they do now, but would throw it over the top as they try to deny me at the high post, where I got a bunch of layups. So anyway, we beat them down there based on a really good game plan. So Coach Gibson, was really good that way. I would say defensively, we tried some stuff, but it wasn't his focal point. Coach, I really benefited from Coach Holland coming from making me play defense in a way that it was demanding. And but anyway, going back to your question, Coach Gibson really understood the game, knew how to adjust his offense to what was going on with how the other team played.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a good point. I forgot you were the first class of freshman eligibility.
Yeah.
So you benefited from that. Did you see any downside? I mean, looking back, did it ever make sense not to have freshmen play?
In hindsight, no. A lot of guys were ready way before. And of course, the year before I became, freshman eligible and was a freshman, David Thompson had played freshman basketball at NC State. Well, for that guy not to be playing varsity at that point was really ridiculous because that guy was
or pro. He could have been pro.
Or a pro. That guy was the best college player I've ever seen, and he's gotten some credit, some notoriety for that, particularly that ACC tournament documentary you referenced. But I still think people don't understand how great he was.
Oh gosh, I do. He's like I was like 10 years old when he was in 1975, so I was just beginning to understand the game, and he was a god. And, ACC basketball was everything.
Well, and a wonderful guy. He and I were teammates along with Mitch Kupchak and Tom Burleson, and Norm Sloan was assistant coach on the USA team that played in Russia in 1973. Yeah. So we played the World University Games the summer after the USA had lost the Olympics for the first time ever in the controversial 72 Olympics game in Munich. So we take our team, which was young, a bunch of kind of 19-year-olds, including David and myself. That was obviously a year ahead in class-wise. And we go to Moscow, and in the finals, who we're playing, the Russians, the same team that won the Olympic game. We just killed them because David blew their mind. Alexander Bailoff, who was the hero of the Olympics for the Russians, of course, made a game winner, went to the basket early in the game, might have even been the first play of the game for what looked like an uncontested layup. David caught it, on the way up and just spiked it. It landed somewhere near midcourt. The score might have been 0-0. The game just started. The game was over because even the Russian fans were going like, "Whoa!" Nothing like it that they had seen.
Yeah, he's like LeBron James or Jordan before all those guys. He was just incredible. So also in a tournament special, one guy I didn't know was such a wonderful storyteller was Walter Davis. He really was great. I didn't realize he was such a funny storyteller. Did you know Walter pretty well?
Yeah, of course, we play against each other, and for years, not just in the ACC battles, but then in the pros. We were both three men. Phoenix and Seattle were rivals. We played in Western Conference Finals against one another. Then in 1979, he had a little more prominent role for Phoenix than I did with Seattle, but I was a rotational player and still guarding him a fair amount. But also in those days, I referenced going to work camps. And in the summertime, that's what I did. A lot of guys did. You just go around kind of ACC territory and work summer basketball camps. Well, there was a camp at Gardner-Webb College, which is down near Charlotte, which had a reputation of being two things. One, paying a little more than the other camps did, which paying a little more. We got $200 a week instead of, I think the other camps were paying $150 a week. That mattered, believe it or not, at that time. But also the runs were great at night. Because Gardner-Webb, a guy named John Drew was in the NBA, would come back and play. Artis Gilmore went there in junior college. He didn't play when I was there. But the games at night were always the ACC counselors against everybody else. So Walter Davis and I were in the same cabin together. And we actually, at night, we weren't playing against each other at that point. We were part of the ACC team playing the rest of the counselors from everywhere. And they were good players. Again, they were NBA guys, ABA guys, and then some of the other counselors. So the runs at night were fantastic and legend. In fact, I got there that summer, and Gus Gerardo worked there the summer before, and Gus could really jump and dunk. And so guys, I got there and I said, "Ooh, Gus was here last summer, and this dunk." So I'm thinking, man, I love Gus, but man, I can dunk too. So I got off a couple of seconds. I was thinking to myself, I want them talking about me next year. So and here's how it was kind of a more band of brothers. There was a guy working at the camp who was a good buddy of all the NC State guys. So, he needed to ride back to Raleigh after the camp was over. And I gave him a ride. I ended up back up in Raleigh with all the NC State guys. There was David and Monty and Phil Spence and Kenny Carr. So I ended up driving up Friday night and hanging out with those guys. And again, they were my rivals. So anyway, but it was a small group. We all knew each other. And the point being, that summer camp overlap meant, while we still, were rivals and competed, we had kind of friendships too.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't know. I did an interview with Joe Harrington, who coaches George Mason and Long Beach State, and he worked for Lefty for many years, and he said there was a big competition to get great players to be counselors because that counselor game at night was so important. I didn't even know that existed.
Well, I can remember clearly when Moses signed at Maryland. Of course, then he ended up going straight to the ABA instead of matriculating. But he showed up at camp, and Barry. You asked Barry Parker the story. Barry was there working at the camp that summer. So the first game, Moses shows up. Of course, he's this legendary guy now. His reputation as a high school player of the year. And the first time really most guys had seen him play was in the counselor game at University of Maryland right after Moses got out of Petersburg High. So Moses, by the way, he and I were teammates, and people have forgotten this and maybe never knew it, and why would they? So I get to Portland as a rookie. I'm the first round pick, but as we talked about, the ABA and NBA had merged that summer. Well, in the dispersal draft, the NBA or the Portland Trailblazers had gotten Dave Twardzik and Maurice Lucas, both of whom became starters on our championship team, but also got Moses Malone. In training camp, Moses was with the Portland Trailblazers. So you talk about a training camp, we got a healthy Bill Walton, a new Maurice Lucas trying to prove himself, and Moses Malone. I mean, the battles inside. Well, Moses was with us during preseason, and the Portland payroll that year was just about $1 million. Believe it or not, championship team. And Walton and Maurice Lucas were most of that. And Moses was making kind of what they were making from his ABA salary, which was carried over. The Blazers at $1 million couldn't afford to keep all three.
Wow.
And by the way, only two of them could start. So they chose to trade Moses.
Wow.
They traded Moses. Again, this has been forgotten, I think, in NBA lore. Moses got traded from Portland to Buffalo. Does anybody remember Moses in Buffalo? No. He was there only a couple of weeks, is my recollection. If it wasn't a couple of weeks, it was a month. And then they traded to Houston.
Wow.
Buffalo, Portland made a mistake. Buffalo made a worse mistake. They had him. And they moved him on to Houston, where, of course, he becomes, Moses Malone, the Hall of Fame Moses Malone. Everyone does remember. So anyway, long way of saying, I got to know Moses then because of UVA. He always called me homie. and just, great affection and respect for that guy.
There's a legend in Northern Virginia. Your teammate, I don't get his name wrong, West Springfield guy, Dave Kester's, I believe his name.
Yeah, Kester, yeah, uh-huh. Yeah.
They played against Petersburg in the state championship, and they held the ball. We had this coach named Don McCool, legendary high school coach, and they had him. They held the ball. I think they ended up losing 45-44. It was just one of those games.
That game was at University Hall. I'm pretty sure I was out of town, but I think that was at U Hall.
Yeah, it's one of those games they still talk about. So, look, let's get to Terry Holland. So Terry Holland comes in, and a young Terry Holland, and he always, as a young guy, or when he was 75, he always looks great, always looks the same. But you had a young Terry Holland. What was he like when you first started playing for him?
Yeah, and I'm going to go back just a second too on Coach Gibson, because I don't give him short shrift. He got the program going, and he was a charming guy. He was a fun guy with a twinkle in his eye. He left UVA after my second year to go to University of South Florida, and then had a heart attack and died a year later. So but UVA fans remember him, well, and he took a program that was nowhere when he got there in the mid-60s to make it a nationally ranked program, and to a point where I wouldn't have gone there if he hadn't done what he'd done with, and certainly Barry had a lot to do with that. But he was really, you could not like him, just the kind of guy that he was. So Terry comes in, and I think whatever he was 12 years older than me, so he was 33 when he got the job-ish. Might have been 34, but a very young guy. And we played against his Davidson team the year before, and so somewhat familiar with him. They beat us. I know I had a terrible game. And so he comes in, and right away he was demanding. And that was evidenced by our preseason conditioning program that just beat everybody up, but it set a tone. We're going to be the best conditioned team. You guys are going to work harder than you've ever worked, which we did. And, maybe we didn't spend as much time as we should on basketball skills because we got off to a slow start. But again, I was dragging around the leg, so I was going through the workouts. But, I know he was looking at me. He never said this, but he was looking at me saying, really? I don't get it with this guy. He has a bit of a reputation, played on the national team, et cetera. So, but he established not just that we were going to be in great shape, but we were going to have a physicality about us that we weren't going to get out conditioned, we weren't going to get out fought. We were going to be a defensive team first. So he established that, and I've told the story a lot, but I think it's worth telling. So we started out slow, but we got better throughout the year, and we had a really hard schedule. I think it was ranked by some Wisconsin in a tournament at Marquette in the same tournament in Milwaukee. We played, at Pitt, who was really good at that point. Anyway, our non-league schedule was very hard, and the ACC was great. North Carolina State was the national champion that year. So, but anyway, we got better, and we beat North Carolina at home that year, which I don't know how, but we did. So anyway, we made progress, but then we're playing NC State, the defending national championship, in the first round of the ACC tournament. David Thompson is still David Thompson. He's there. We get down 20 in the first half. Not unexpected by most. We came all the way back. And second half, I got hot, but I missed a shot from the corner. I still remember it. That I can't remember if we would have put us up one with a minute or so to go or tied the game, but I didn't make it. So anyway, we lost a close game, came all the way back. And it was but by losing that game meant we had a losing record for the year. We ended the year, that was our last game. We were 12-13. So we come into the locker room afterwards, and Coach Holland said, guys, I'm proud of what you've done. You've made a lot of people proud the way you came back tonight. I want you to feel that way. And by the way, next year we're going to be back here. We're back at the ACC tournament playing for the championship. I look around like, wait a minute, we just finished the losing season. We just lost in the first round of the ACC tournament. What basis do you have? We're thinking it. I'm thinking it. Thinking we're going to be an ACC champion or playing for the championship in a year from now. Well, I don't know if he believed it or not, but he said it, and really planted the seed. Like, okay, we got something. We got a foundation to build on here. We knew we had some good players coming in. next year's freshman class. We knew we had a good core coming back, included Billy Langlow and Mark Iverman, Dave Kesters, and myself. And so anyway, it was not nothing. And the fact that he was willing to say that, or did say it, I think really impacted how we approached the next season and allowed us to actually be a champion a year from then.
Yeah, that was a very Valvano thing to do, is say something like that.
Yeah.
So I talked to a lot of your UVA brethren, and
Mhm.
they always talk about how nasty the University of Maryland fans were. Barry said that, Coach McKegg said that, I think Bobby may have said it, all of them say it. But I didn't realize that Coach Holland and Coach Driesell had a connection, that Coach Holland had worked for Coach Driesell.
Oh yeah, he was assistant at Davidson. And, the story goes, well, it doesn't just go, it's true. When Lefty took a job at Maryland, he was taking Terry with him to be assistant coach.
Mhm.
But then Davidson tried to hire Larry Brown. I think they thought they had hired Larry Brown to be the head coach at Davidson. And Larry did what Larry's often done, changed his mind. And so then Davidson circled back to Terry and offered him the head job. And Terry at that point would have been, 28, 29 years old. And so then Terry had the 5-year run as head coach at Davidson before getting the Virginia job. And at Lefty, he and Lefty, stayed close. Terry and I were both at Lefty's Hall of Fame induction a couple of years ago in Springfield. Lefty was hilarious. And so, in fact, Lefty was the speaker at the basketball banquet at the rival University of Virginia, which would never happen these days. But I guess it was after my sophomore, junior year. I'm not sure Terry even coached UVA, but anyway, they were close. But a funny aside to that, it goes back to the ACC tournament. So we're playing in the Capitol Center, and we're playing Maryland in the semifinals. And of course, Maryland thinks they got a great chance of winning the ACC championship, going to the NCAA's for the first time. Why wouldn't they? In the backyard, they got a great team, a nationally ranked team. And it's halftime, and we played well the first half. I can't remember the halftime score, doesn't matter. But the locker rooms were situated such in the Capitol Center so that our locker room was abutted to the Maryland locker room, and walls were thick and concrete, but you could still hear. And Lefty is screaming at the Maryland team, and we're sitting in our locker room next door, and we can hear it. And Terry's going through halftime adjustments, which always happens. And then he just kind of puts up his hands and says, listen, we hear. So Terry says, I've been in that locker room. I know what that sounds like. I know what that means. Said, we just keep doing what we're doing. We're going to be fine. And everyone kind of smiled. It kind of loosens up, gave us confidence. Of course, we went on to win, relatively easily against Maryland.
Yeah. Well, Terry Holland and Dean Smith are such gentlemen. Generally, they're known to be. So maybe that's media hype. Why was their rivalry so bitter? Why did they seem to have such hostility towards each other?
Well, I'll speak to some of it firsthand, but some of it goes back where I'm going to speculate. I think some of it goes back to the Davidson UNC thing when Terry and Lefty were at Davidson, because there was a very bitter recruiting of Charlie Scott. Charlie Scott, of course, a fantastic player and breakthrough player in terms of ACC history. He had committed to Davidson. He was at, I think, Laurinburg Institute was called, in North Carolina, and he committed to Davidson to Lefty and Terry. And the story goes, at least what I've heard, or think I remember, was that even after he committed to Davidson, North Carolina kept recruiting him. Well, we know what happened. He ended up going to North Carolina. So that created, great bitterness between the Davidson folks and UNC, and specifically Lefty and Dean Smith. Well, then what I do have firsthand knowledge of, and I talked about it on that ACC tournament documentary, was, going into Terry's first year coaching Virginia, going into my third year, Gus Gerard had left us to go to the ABA. He got his deal. Great, good for Gus. We didn't have a lot of talent coming back. I don't know if Dean Smith knew this or not, but I was kind of my third knee surgery, so I wasn't great. And he said on a radio station in North Carolina that we wouldn't win an ACC game that year. Well, that word got back to Coach Holland on that. And then there was Dean tried to deny it, but someone had a copy of it, so there was no denying it. At least that was a story that he tried to deny it. I know I'm not firsthand knowledge of that part, but the fact he did say it, I don't know if he tried to walk it back or not. Well, we weren't very good, as I previously said, but we did get better, and we did beat North Carolina.
Yeah.
That one of our 4 ACC wins. So anyway, that created, and then the fact we beat them the next year in the ACC final, and the following year, this maybe has gotten a little too much forgotten too in UVA lore. Virginia is playing UNC in the final of the ACC tournament again.
That's right.
Prior to my senior year, UVA had never been in the ACC final. Period. Never even gotten that far. Now they're playing for the second straight year. Huge, even bigger underdog than the year before, and is leading. Late into the game. Well, there was an incident which Mark Ivoroni can tell you firsthand, the way I wasn't there and can't, but where at halftime Dean sort of accosted Mark in a way where he was pointing at him, jabbing at him, might even touched him in the runway going back to the locker rooms about physicality or something. And again, people were there saw it, and Mark in particular can tell you about it, and he should. I think he would. Terry's reaction to that was, worry about your own players. So anyway, there was a series of incidents, all due to competitiveness and rivalry and games won and lost and recruiting battles and the usual. But I'm not disagreeing with where he started. They're both gentlemen, both great coaches, and it got sideways. And I don't know if it got those wounds got healed or not, but they were open wounds for a while that I know of.
Yeah, well, Mark Ivoroni had a way of getting under people's skin.
Yeah, he did.
So well, let's talk about your senior year. You had an incredible year, so I assume your knees were better. You averaged.
Yeah, I got better and stronger, and just having a little time off. And I worked so hard at it, getting my leg strength back, and the knee got better. So yeah, and I was healthy, fully healthy with the knee. My first year, my fourth year, and not so much in between. But I was healthy, so I was out of excuses.
And then the ACC tournament, for the first time in the history of the tournament, which I guess at the time was 21 years old, it was in Maryland. It was not in North Carolina. And you guys had, we all know that you won it. You had to beat 3 nationally ranked teams to do it. You're huge underdogs each time. Was it an advantage that the tournament was not in North Carolina, that it was in Maryland?
Maybe. I mean, you can't say it wasn't. The fact that we won it, hadn't gotten there before. But I always liked going to Greensboro too. It was such a great event. It wasn't like we disliked Greensboro. We just didn't have any success there. So if we played like we played, we would have won anywhere. I think I'm convinced of that. But having a different venue, maybe different habits, instead of falling into old habits of, this is what we've always done. We've always come down to Greensboro and lost to NC State. That's what we did my previous 3 years. And this time we went to the Capital Center and beat NC State in the first round. So I think just maybe a change up, it just gave us a fresh perspective. I don't think you can discount that.
Yeah, and one thing that you definitely played with, it was like a reckless abandon that this is it. It's my last game. If I lose, you just played with nothing to lose. You went out there, you just let it all hang out.
Yeah, I sure did. And the other guys, I've gotten a disproportionate amount of credit, and so I played well, but so did a lot of our guys. And we wouldn't have done it without what they did. And, I still think about Billy Langlow and what a great leader, point guard, and player he was. And again, we were roommates, and just seeing him get some credit, but in my mind, not enough is also a big part of it.
Yeah, it was a great moment in the crowd, and hopefully, I'm sure mostly students, that kind of held you up on the court after the game. Yeah. It's got to be one of the greatest moments of your life.
Yeah, looking back, yes, and I've had fun. Yesterday was Father's Day. My kids were all home. For them to see that ACC tournament special, and of course, it's ancient history to them. And I got started on the family thing later in life anyway. But to be able to share that with them and see the reaction to that crowd has been a great thrill that certainly I didn't anticipate at the time. I had a funny experience. I've only told the story one other time, I think. I was back at JPJ for a game a couple of years ago, and a guy comes up to me, and he's a big guy, but now, kind of my age, and says, "Do you remember me?" And I says, "Well, frankly, no." He says, "Well, I'm the guy that had you on my shoulders during the celebration." And I was humbled because this guy, obviously there was no pre-plan. There was no, this guy just came out, hoisted me up, put me on his shoulders, which, I weighed 200 pounds. So it wasn't, and I was there on there for quite a while. So I'm thinking, man, that was something. You did that. You're a strong guy, but also, hey, I never really saw your face. So, I hope you'll forgive me for not recognizing you, because I didn't really know who you were, but I appreciate him saying something.
That was a great moment. Well, you lose the next week to DePaul in the tournament, and Bobby told me you guys are so tired, 3 games in a row, emotionally drained. Former Bullet Dave Corzine was on that DePaul team, but your stock had soared. So you went from having knee troubles or whatever to being a 5th pick in the NBA draft, and this was a draft where there was no ABA. So as we talked about earlier, and you were picked before 4 future Hall of Famers, Robert Parrish, Adrian Dantley, Alex English, and Dennis Johnson. So
good research. I've mentioned that a lot, and think about it in terms of when I was actually doing a draft for the Sonics, because those 2nd-round picks, DJ and Alex English, by the way, were 2nd-round picks. So Dantley was taken right after me, and Parrish was taken with the 8th pick. So it's not an exact science, but my draft has soared. I helped myself too. The big postseason tournament in those days was the Aloha Classic.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Where you'd fly all the way from Charlottesville to Honolulu, and then you would play 3 straight nights in Honolulu. Well, almost all the top seniors were there, and you'd play against each other with 4 different teams, and the scouts were all there. So I played really well there. So that I think that reinforced, maybe I think it maybe jumped me up in the draft a little bit.
Yeah. Well, then you played for one of these magical teams, the Portland Trailblazers, with Jack Ramsey, who we all know really well from his many years of doing commentaries. Very, very bright guy, but also Bill Walton, a very cerebral guy. We talked about earlier, Lionel Hollins, Dave Twardzik, Maurice Lucas. I don't know if you know, did Coach McKay ever tell you he played against Maurice Lucas in high school? I don't know.
Well, no, but it doesn't surprise me, because the Western Pennsylvania connection again. Yeah. Luke at Pittsburgh Shenley. He was with that was a legendary team that Luke played on in high school. A guy named Jeep Kelly, who never really, he might have made it briefly in the NBA, but when I was coming out of high school, he was younger than I was, but it was like, oh, Jeep Kelly. And there was another guy too, whose name escapes me, but it was on that team. It was also a senior that had a good college career, not an NBA career. So anyway, he played on a great team, and they're probably the same age, I think.
Same age.
Bob and Luke, yeah. Bob maybe a year older. Bob maybe 1 year older than this, as I think about it. Yeah.
Well, you joined the NBA in a really a transition era. At the beginning of the 1970s, there was probably, I think, 12 teams in the NBA, maybe 13 or 14. And by the end of the 70s, I think there was 22 teams. 22, because there were 18 teams. Then they added the 4 ABA teams. So my rookie year, there were 22 NBA teams. Yes. Yeah, and the demographics had changed drastically. In the 1970s, it might have been 1 or 2 or 3 African Americans on each team. By the 1970s, something like the Knicks were completely African American, all black team. Yeah. The league had an edge to it. There were fights in games. Yeah. What was the mood of the league from your eyes when you joined the NBA?
You knew you were going to get tested, and for me, again, I was a little bigger and stronger, but I still weighed 200 pounds, and there I was. So, and I remember Jack Ramsey, who I love, I didn't play that much as a rookie because it was a championship team, but he basically said to me, in so many words, you're going to get tested. You better get ready for it. And he's talking about fights. I was in a fight with a guy named Fred Foster. Most people wouldn't remember. He was a strong guy, played for the Buffalo Braves, which are now the Clippers. And, he came after me, and, he had to be ready for it, and you knew you're going to get tested. And Jack Ramsey even told a story in the locker room of Dave Cowens and a guy named Bob Kaufman, because Bob Kaufman was playing for Jack in Buffalo at that point, where he established himself, and everyone said, okay, this guy's not going to back down. So you knew it was coming, and it was part of the culture. But I would say you didn't rely on the referees to clean it up. The players cleaned it up some. So it sounds harsh and survival of the fittest. Maybe in some ways it was, but it really kind of felt right at that time too. It wasn't that bad. It's like, okay, I'm playing in the big leagues. I'm playing against grown men that we're playing for our livelihood. Get ready. So there was that. And again, I wasn't a tough guy, but you had to both defend yourself and be aggressive about establishing who you were and being productive, or there was no place for you in a league of 232 players. So I knew that. I accepted it, and I love being there.
Well, you had a really solid rookie season. I mean, it's not the easiest place to start in terms of there's a lot of talent on that team. But I think in Game 5 or Game 6 of the championship series, you had 10 points against Philadelphia. So you definitely contributed to the. So you must have made a good adjustment, at least to the playing style of the NBA.
Yeah, I was actually playing. I remember the last game of the regular season that year, and again, I played sporadically, and some games I didn't play. Although I played 66 of them, but I didn't play a lot of minutes when I played typically. But I had a really good playoff series against Denver. We beat Denver, who I think was the conference champions, and they might have had a better regular season record than we did in Portland because Walton missed games as he always did with injuries. So the fact we beat Denver, and I was in rotation, I really had some good games. And then the last game, the clinching game against Denver, which was Game 6, I'm pretty sure in Portland, I dove for loose ball. I hit my shoulder, and all of a sudden I couldn't raise my arm. So then we're playing then we clinched the series, and I go from rotation, so I can't raise my arm. It's my right arm, by the way. I'm not quite ready to be an effective player. So we played the Lakers then, who'd beaten us either 3-1 or was 4-0, and Kareem was the best player in the game at that point. Dr. J might have been in the conversation, but Kareem killed Walton all the time, by the way. People have forgotten that too, because our team ended up winning it. But I went from, going to be a rotational player against the Lakers to not playing so much in that series because I couldn't raise my arm. So there was that. So that my shoulder got better. But now we beat the Lakers. We actually swept them in that series 4-0. I think they beat us 3-1 during the regular season. So that established the rotation without me. So we got to the Philly series. I played some. I actually made most of my shots during that series, but it was it was not long minutes. But anyway, it was something to build on. I had one game, as you pointed out, I had 10 points in the final series, and I think I was kind of 9 for 12 overall for the series. Not a lot of minutes for shots, but they went in. So I went into the next season thinking I was going to be a rotational guy. They basically told me I was going to be a rotational guy. And then the league mandated the rosters be cut from 12 to 11. So Portland was able to get a first and a second round pick for me. The first round pick was an unprotected first round pick. So it could have been, and it was, Portland had a choice between Detroit's pick or Seattle's pick. At that point, Seattle was terrible. We were the worst team in the league when I got traded there. It was second worst. Detroit also was not very good. So it ended up being the 7th pick in the first round, but it could have been the first pick in the first round. So anyway, Portland got good assets for me, probably more than they should have, frankly. But I got shipped up I-5 to Seattle.
Yeah, well, you ended up playing for Lenny Wilkins, and he engineered, I guess there was a coaching change early in the year, and he engineered one of the greatest turnarounds. I guess you guys started, I think, 5-17, you said earlier.
Yeah.
And, Lenny Wilkins, great guard himself, one of the coolest guys you ever see. I don't think I've ever even seen him angry, watching TV all these years. What was he like as a coach?
Well, I think it was the greatest turnaround ever. I think that might even be objective. We were 5-6. When I got there, we were 2-10. And I helped lead us to 3-7 the next 10 games, and then so we're 22 games in to be 5-17, and Lenny gets the job, and we've told the story a lot because we had a big reunion here a few years ago, and Lenny comes in. We have a team meeting in Kansas City. The Kings were then in Kansas City, so Sacramento, and he comes in and we have a team meeting and says, I think we got enough in this room to win. And we're kind of looking around and going like, we're just not 5-17. We're getting killed most nights. We're kind of looking around thinking, I don't know, coach. I don't know what you're thinking, drinking, smoking. I don't know what we're seeing. We don't get it. But what we do, we went out and beat the Kings that night. I was a starter in his first game. And then we beat the Kings. And then we flew to Boston, and he changed the lineup. I was not the starter, but then we killed the Celtics in Boston. And he put Jack Sickman at the 4 spot, who'd been on the bench, and John Johnson in the 3 spot, and me coming off the bench. So I'm still a rotational guy, but we beat the Celtics. So now we won 2 straight, and we're coming home. So from there, we just went on a run to go from 5-17 to Game 7 of the NBA Finals. So it was something.
Well, he might have been just, pulling a Terry Holland and just telling you something that wasn't true. But when you think about it, he had 2 Hall of Famers, and then another guy that was close, probably Gus Williams, is close. So you did have a lot of talent.
You've done good research, by the way. So I've been thinking as you've been reciting all this stuff, but yes, that's true. We also had a great leader in Paul Silas. Who'd been there.
Was he Hall of Fame? He might be Hall of Fame.
No, College Hall of Fame, because he averaged 20 and 20 at Creighton. But just a great leader. He'd already won 2 titles with Celtics. So he was a guy, and I stayed in touch with Paul. So I have such respect for him. And depending on the time you have for the broadcast, I'll tell you a story about that, because it's relatively recent.
Yeah. And
he could clean up a locker room and young players in a way that the player he was directing his message to wouldn't be offended. I've never seen anybody do it as well as he did it, where he'd do it in a funny way and everyone ended up laughing, and the player would get the message, but wouldn't be mad, and there wouldn't be an outcome. So here's my story about Paul. At this point, he's in his mid-30s. He's at the tail end of his career. He couldn't run very well. He never was a shooter. He didn't jump that well, but he was just so smart, savvy, and tough. So he wasn't a scorer or a stat guy. He was a leader, but on the court, he just sets a message. So I give a speech. I'm asked to speak. This is 4 or 5 years ago at a local high school banquet, and I had taken the time. I prepared it, but for whatever reason, in the middle of it, I'm talking to a group of parents that sort of remembered our '79 championship team, and I said, I don't know if I phrased it as a question. I said, on our championship team, we had a player that couldn't run, jump, or shoot, but he was so indispensable. We never could have won the championship without him. He was the best teammate I've ever been around. And a bunch of Paul Silas, because they knew because he was that kind of guy. So I said in front of everybody at the banquet, I said, I've never told him that. So I said, I'm going to call him. I'm going to tell him that. So what I do, the next day I picked up the phone. I called his number. He's living in Charlotte. And I said, Paul, I had a nickname for him, which I won't repeat, but he had this great laugh. I said, I was speaking last night, and here's what I said. So again, I won't repeat it, but I told him what I said. And the line goes quiet for a second. And I'm thinking, I don't know how he's reacting to it. Guys don't usually say these kind of things to one another. It's not a strength of ours, but we don't usually. But here I am. So I don't know how he's reacting, whether he's getting emotional or not. And all he said was, and again I'll clean this up a little bit. He said after the pause, he says, "Blanking right." So I fell out laughing. He fell out. He was that kind of guy. So anyway, getting back to where you were, we did end up in hindsight having talent, but we didn't know it at the time. And here's a lesson, I think, for the situation. Lenny gave us confidence by starting in same way Terry Holland did before that, and saying, I think you guys are better than you think. He didn't say we're going to the NBA Finals, but he did say, I think we got ingredients here. We got enough to win. So and he certainly made some adjustments too, things we were doing. We didn't really have a defensive game plan. That he gave us some rules that follow in situations like chasing around a pick instead of going over the top, or not knowing which way we're going to go, so your teammates can't react because no one knows. So anyway, the rules help too.
Well, Bullets had a very similar season you guys did. They did not start off well. They had lots of injuries. Phil Chenier was out for the year. We got right. Now this is not research. This is a Bullets fan.
Yeah.
Bobby Dandridge put his stamp on the team. Wes had knee problems all year, but he started playing well. And I think our record was 45-37 or something like that. And we just got hot in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And then, the series against Seattle, it was a wonderful series. Two, very physical teams, very, very athletic teams. But the one thing about that game, that series, is the Bullets went to Seattle for the 7th game. And at the time, it had never been done. No team had ever won the 7th game on the opposing team's floor. And we went up there and did it. And I remember in DC, we just went crazy. We couldn't believe we won the series.
Yeah, we couldn't either because we thought we were up 3-2 and we really laid an egg in game 6. We should have been more competitive in the game in Washington. But yeah, you still figure we're coming home for game 7. They'd already planned the parade in Seattle, which they still went ahead and had, even though we lost game 7. It was more like a type reaction than when you win.
There's a lesson there. You don't plan a parade until
no. Maybe even go through with it after you lose, but they've never been to the finals before either. No Seattle team had been. So, it was interesting on so many levels with those two teams. And I ended up playing with Elvin Hayes for 2 years in Houston too. We were teammates. And of course he was at, his Hall of Fame peak at that point. And by the way, since you talked about Bobby Dandridge, let me say this, as a guy who had to play against him, he was the hardest guy. And by the way, the three men in the league at that time in the late 70s and going in the early 80s were Dantley, Mark Aguirre then came in, Alex English, Bernard King, Dr. J, Bird comes in 79, Magic kind of
Jamal Wilkes.
Jamal Wilkes, they're all in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. So those are my matchups. But Bob, I'm not in the Hall of Fame, I won't be, but Bob Dandridge belongs there because he was, of all that group, he was the hardest guy at time. He had all this herky-jerky stuff. You could never felt like he bothered because you never knew where the shot was coming from or where he was, how at what point he was getting off because he just had such a style and a release. And he was a really good defender too. Yeah. He was a really key ingredient to that team. So anyway, we lose game 7 in Seattle. You talk about Dennis Johnson being in the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
Deservedly so. And went on to do great things after Seattle. He was 0 for 14 from the field in game 7 at home. So, he came back and was the MVP of the finals next year. So he had someone for it. But, it's not easy to go 0 for 14. It's not easy to be left in the game when you're 0 for 14.
Yeah, and he became known as such a great clutch player. And
yes, he did. And he was.
Best teammate he ever had. And he had McHale and Parrish, and he calls Dennis. And that was, I won't forget that. You're talking about Dandridge's timing. John Lucas is like that as well. When John Lucas played, he always kept his opponent off balance. Like when he would go for a layup, he would his strides would lengthen or shorten. He would just kind of keep you off balance. And he used to do the same thing because I learned that from John, from watching.
No, he was that way. Although he wasn't making people off balance that much going right. He wasn't going right that much.
He was all left. So I wanted to ask you about the next year. You get rid of Marvin Webster and you bring in Lonnie Shelton. Now, when you think about that, I guess Sigma needed more room in post, and Lonnie Shelton is more of a 4. But it just seemed like a strange move to let Webster, the human eraser, go and to get Shelton. So tell me about that move. And did you think it was? I mean, it worked. Did you see that move?
It worked, but it was by accident. And again, this is how it happened. So Marvin was a free agent, and we just got in the finals. So we think we're coming back next year to win it. We'll come back to the same group. Well, something went south in negotiations between the Sonics and Marvin and his agent, and Marvin ends up signing with the Knicks. So it was just a breakdown. That wasn't a plan. It was just we lost our starting center. In those days, there wasn't unrestricted free agency. If a free agent signed with another team, then the two teams had to work out compensation between themselves. And if they couldn't, the commissioner would make the compensation that he deemed fair.
Wow.
Well, Marvin signs, the two teams can't work out compensation. The commissioner then steps in, Larry O'Brien at the time, and sends Lonnie Shelton to us and a first-round draft pick for Marvin Webster. So there's an interesting twist, which I'll get to. At the same time, Tommy Lagarde, who had been on the North Carolina team that we'd beaten when I played at Virginia, had after his rookie year of Denver, he'd been the 9th pick in the draft. They traded him to us. So we had Tommy Lagarde coming in, also as another big man. So now Marvin Webster's gone, Lonnie Shelton's coming in, but Tom Lagarde is now our starting center. He's the center. Sigma's still a 4-man. Lonnie Shelton and I are the forwards coming off the bench. So anyway, it was a really good deep team, and we get off to a good start, and we already had the great backcourt. Early in the season, but I think my recollection, it was early December. Tommy Lagarde's playing great at center. He just recently had his career high of 34 points. Really? He's playing well. Sigma is struggling. He's shooting 30% from the field as a 4-man, but Tommy's playing really well and great. Tommy tears up his ACL in a game in Philly. I can still remember him coming off the court saying, "I think I tore it." Okay, Dr. Lagarde. But Dr. Lagarde was right. He tore his ACL. So what had to happen was Sigma moved over to 5. He was a backup 5, but he was and Lonnie Shelton moving the starting lineup at 4. Well, all that happened was Jack became the all-star center. He was in the correct position then. In fact, he went from shooting 30% early December to making the all-star team less than 2 months later that year, and that was his first of 7 straight all-star appearances. Lonnie, at the 4-man, would in subsequent years would become an all-star as well. In fact, my last year in Seattle, I was a starting 3-man. He was a starting 4-man. He made the all-star team that year, as did Jack and Gus Williams too. So anyway, that was a personnel change. Again, not done by the front office, not a plan. It just happened that way, and it worked out great.
Was that one of the best backcourts you've ever seen that year when they had DJ, Gus, and then Freddie Brown off the bench?
Yeah, it was great backcourt because you had such complementary skills. And as you said, Gus is not in the Hall of Fame, but he made first team All-Pro. I think it was my last year in Seattle, the 81-82 season. He averaged 23 a game, was first team All-Pro. So to have a guy in the Hall of Fame, another guy was first team All-Pro, and Fred is one of the great shooters of all time, was and accepted coming off the bench, which he'd been a starter and leading scorer for years. And I still see Fred around Seattle. We're still friends and in touch. And he'd still go out and make shots from everywhere.
Yeah. So well, you win the championship that year. Was that a surprise? So I don't remember who was favored that year, but I know when I talked to Bobby, he says they were tired. He says they were a year older. He says you guys were a year more experienced. It sounded like to him that they just didn't have it. They just didn't have the legs to beat you guys. It was your time.
Well, I don't know. We went into that season expecting to be a contender, and our goal was win the NBA title. Why wouldn't it be after we just lost Game 7 the year before? We were still young, but we had, to win a Game 6. We were down 3-2 in the Western Conference Finals. We had to win Game 6 in Phoenix to even get to a Game 7 in Seattle, which we then won Game 7 just to get to the finals. So
that's Paul Westfall. That's Paul Westfall and
Alvin Adams.
Who
actually got hurt during the season.
Chuck Robinson. Chuck Robinson.
Gar Hurd was on that team. Gar Hurd missed a shot in Game 6 that would have, won it for him. Walter Davis. Walter Davis on that team, and Walter Davis was an all-star.
Yeah, it was a good team.
Yeah.
So next year you guys have another good year, but then that was Magic's first year.
We lose in the Western Conference Finals to Lakers. For any of the NBA fans who watch Winning Time, they know a lot about the Lakers side of that equation that season. But again, we were the defending champions. They had the home court advantage in the playoffs in Western Conference, but we split with them in LA, so we come home with the home court advantage back. So if we win the 2 games at home were not played in the Kingdom, which was our home court that season, or even the Coliseum, which had previously been our home. They were both booked. This would never happen now. We played in the college arena at the University of Washington, Heck Edmondson Pavilion, in the Western Conference Finals. In the college, crazy in hindsight, because it's just the NBA has come a long way. But we lose Game 3, and now we have Game 4. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's a CBS game. Our first half went so well that I was the halftime interview by Hot Rod Hundley. I was doing an interview because I had 10 points in the second quarter. We're up 21 in the second quarter, and it's Jamal Wilkes and Kareem and Magic and Spencer Haywood's in a Hall of Famer. So Norm Nixon. So it was a 4 Hall of Fame, a great Laker team on to win the championship. We're killing them. They come back and beat us in that game. So now it's over. We're down 3-1. And after that game, Paul Silas, the great leader he was, and DJ, the great player was, got into it, after the game. And so what little chance we might have had being down 3-1, was lost there because our chemistry now was awry. And so anyway, we went down, competed, but lost game 5, and the Lakers go on to beat Philly and become the NBA champions.
Yeah. Well, then you lose all momentum because Gus Williams takes a year off. What kind of guy was Gus? I didn't know him too well. He played for the Bullets.
Yeah.
He's a very quiet guy. He didn't do a lot of interviews and stuff. What was Gus like, and what happened to make him take a whole year off?
Yeah, contract dispute. He regrets it to this day that he took the year off. He ended up getting a really good contract when he came back, but he sat out. DJ was traded for Paul Westphal. Paul got hurt, and Lonnie Shelton got hurt. So next year we go from, being a contender to competitive with the Lakers to having a losing record. And so anyway, it was happenstance. It was injury, which, guess what, happens in sports. But to your question, Gus was a wonderful and is a wonderful guy. He's a good friend. Stay in touch with him. As I look around where I'm sitting, we're doing this interview. Last time he was in Seattle, he stayed here. This is where my office is, and we've got a guest bedroom, and he was here. So he's had some health issues recently, and so we're worried about him. But he was just such a positive guy. He was always upbeat, always funny. Everyone got along with him. He was a real bridge. Paul Silas was a leader type, Gus was the funny break the ice guy amongst all teammates, and was so quick. He had a saying, which he bring up all the time, because of course, it fit him. He said, "There's only 2 kinds of people in the world: the quick and the dead." And of course, he knew where he fit in that saying, and was a one-man fast break. He could get the ball out of the break and beat everybody and weave away and get a layup, kind of like you see, some current guys, it's Steph Curry a little bit, but Gus was faster and quicker.
Yeah. Well, well, you head over to down to Houston, and got a lot of playing time down there. You had some good years personally. Your teams weren't as strong. I mean, we can't win rings every year. But during this time, because you're headed towards Stanford and getting the MBA, did you use your free time when you were as the NBA player? Were you thinking about business ideas and things you were going to do after your career was over?
Not specifically. I wasn't any different than most, if not all, NBA guys. I thought I was still better than most guys, and I was wrong, but I still thought that. I thought I could still play another year. My last year in Houston, though, which was Ralph's rookie year, where Ralph was rookie of the year and was terrific, was a year, by the way, the reason there's an NBA lottery now, because it was so clear that Houston Rockets down the stretch were trying to lose games to get the number 1 pick again, which they did. But it was so clear that it had to put the lottery in the next year, so teams just couldn't tank the way that team was or did. So, but I went from I started the first 17 games that season and went to hardly playing for the rest of the year. So I thought the handwriting might be on the wall. So I did order the GMAT, which were the business board study guide, before the season was over. So I thought I was still going to play another year, but I was going to get myself at least have taken the test so I could apply when that time came. So anyway, I started studying for the GMAT right after that season. That was my 8th year in the NBA, so I'm now 30 years old. And I can remember taking the test, and I'm living back in Seattle in the offseason that June, and I studied hard, so I was ready. You take a break from the test, went to the men's room, and a guy there standing next to me, again, I'm 2 months from playing in the NBA, says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Same thing as you, pal. I'm taking the test, to get ready for the next step." So anyway, the test went well. Nobody in the NBA would give me a guaranteed contract anymore. I got offered to go to training camp, but I got offered a guaranteed money to go to Italy. So at that point, I was already applying to business school, going to play, last year in Italy, and then go to grad school. Yeah.
Well, then you started Walker Capital, and you're still a financial guy. Did you enjoy the Wall Street stuff? Is that a passion of yours, or is this a?
Yeah, I worked for Goldman Sachs 7 years before starting Walker Capital in San Francisco. Yeah. So I got good training from what at that time was really a top firm. Maybe still is, but I know for sure at that time it was. So no, I did like it. I like the investing process. I like trying to connect the dots and all that goes into it. And there's a competitive side to it too. You can't get too caught up emotionally. That tends not result in good results in terms of investing. You got to be disciplined. But so there is some application to sports. And by the way, you have losing days and you have losing streaks, and just like you did as an athlete. And I think athletic training does help in that regard. Yeah.
Well, if you can give us a little Wally Walker investment advice these days with inflation going up, real estate prices are still going up. There's rumors of recession coming. What are you telling your clients now who invest with you?
I just wrote about this. It tends not to be a good backdrop for financial assets in general when you have inflation, which tend to go with rising interest rates. Of course, I'm old enough to remember inflation in the late 70s, early 80s, and that was detrimental. There are assets that tend to perform well when you have that environment. But what's unique about today's environment is we have a Federal Reserve that's tightening monetary policy into a rising inflationary environment. So they're trying to get those interest rates and inflation down. But what that portends, well, let me go back a step. I say it's a rising interest rate inflationary environment, but there's still evidence that the economy right now in the last couple of months is slowing. We're seeing that in our economic numbers. The Purchasing Manager Index, there's a whole host of home building, home sales are if they're not peaking, they have peaked and are starting down. For monetary policy to be tightening at the same time inflation is still high, at a time when the economy is slowing, it's hard not to see a recession on the horizon. Now, I don't know when that is, and I have very suspicious of anybody that thinks they know, but I think it has to happen as long as the Fed keeps tightening that monetary policy, which they pledged to do for the next while. We got to be looking at a recession. Now, recession is also a cure for inflation. So financial assets will become more valuable with lower interest rates and reduced inflation, but we're not there yet. So anyway, I'm set up. There's still some core positions that I will hold and keep long in any scenario, but I try to hedge them, and I'm less long than I typically am. And I think consumer related companies that are consumer facing, that need to hire, like hospitality, anything like restaurants. If you talk to anybody in the restaurant business, it's really hard to hire. They can't hire and staff people. When they do, what they have to pay these days, not just minimum wage, but wages overall have gone up a lot. So costs are up, the cost of food's up, and consumers get pinched. So I think it's going to be a tough stretch here for consumer facing companies and stocks.
Ooh, well, let's maybe we should end on a brighter note here. Well, I guess it's been, but
there's still things that work. By the way, since I mentioned that, in the 70s, what worked were real estate investment trusts, and oil and gas. And oil and gas is supply demand until the last couple of weeks. It worked a lot this year too. Mark Twain, to borrow a famous saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so we could be in a rhyming scenario here with the 70s and 80s, and you just have to get position right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Wally, this has been great. You're one of my childhood heroes. It's an honor for you to take time to talk.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're a great guy. Well, can we just end? I know it's interesting that I forgot the Seattle owner's name. Acker, was it Acker?
Barry Acker's the guy that hired me. Yes.
Yeah. So you had a perfect background. You're an MBA. You're at Goldman Sachs, and a very cerebral player. So how did it? So you were just like, it made common sense for them to give you an opportunity in the
it came out of the blue, and out of the blue in terms of that position, because I was just had started Walker Capital. I was living in San Francisco, but I had done the broadcasts for the Seattle games the previous 2 years. So I was around the team, was familiar with the team. I actually saw it from the inside because I was traveling with the team. I was on the team plane. So I knew from an insider standpoint what was going on. But, again, I hadn't really considered going to the front office of an NBA team. But because it was Seattle and because of my affinity and association to the organization, I did consider it. But ultimately, I said no to Barry Ackerley. And it was almost a classic. As soon as I said no, like, well, we want that guy because he said no. So I still was a no after a month or 6 weeks of being a consultant when they didn't have a general manager in place. But then he offered me equity in the team. And you didn't have to be a Stanford MBA to know that was a unique opportunity to do something, be around a sport I still love. So that's what turned it. I took the job then.
Yeah, well, you had incredible success. I know, are you involved at all if in Seattle attracting a new team to?
Yeah, indirectly these days. Directly in 2013, I was part of the group that bought the Kings. We had a signed binding agreement, but the NBA said no. That was 2013, as I might have said. We're not going to let you buy and move the team. So we thought we had a team there. And we had an arena plan. Now our same group still owns the real estate, which is a really good location for an arena. But now we have a new hockey arena in Seattle too. So if new owner, Seattle will get a team again, probably by expansion, but we don't know that yet. And the NBA doesn't know exactly that either. I stay in touch with the NBA. So if an owner, whoever that new owner is, wants a turnkey solution and willing to be a tenant in a building, they'll go to the new building, Climate Pledge Arena, where the hockey team plays. If they want to be Steve Ballmer or the Golden State Warriors or the Brooklyn Nets and operate their own building, they'll look at our real estate site, and because they can operate their own building and develop the contiguous real estate, which is again down by the football and baseball stadiums. It's a really good location so we're just hanging on the real estate. So that's my indirect involvement. There are always rumors and I always get calls, but I am fairly certain that nothing's going to happen until the NBA gets through its collective bargaining agreement, its labor agreement for expansion anyway, and maybe until after the TV media or streaming rights deal is done too. So we're a couple years out, but Seattle will be ready. It's the best available market, and the NBA is keenly aware of that. So I have no concerns that if a team comes available, Seattle's going to be in a great position.
I mean, the way it supports football, soccer, baseball, it's just, and they supported basketball as well. It's hard.
Well, they did. It was an arena issue. The team left. It's a long story. It should never have happened. And I was on the inside and voted no against the sale of the team. So even though at the time I was a financial beneficiary. So again, in some ways, a sordid tale and a wrong conclusion. But besides that legacy of Sonics being a very successful franchise for 41 years in Seattle, it's a fantastic market. You got this great demographic, a great corporate base, the things that financially are required for an NBA team to succeed.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, best of luck with that. And look, Wally, thanks. If you ever in DC want to grab a coffee or something, I would love to meet you in person. But I really appreciate you giving me so much time today. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, Julian, you've done a great job and a ton of research. I'm so impressed by what you've done. And I love the fact you tracked all these years as an NBA fan, even though it was a Bullets fan. I get that. I get that.
Well, yeah, but you were too. But you were too. You started as both.
No, you're exactly right. Exactly right. Gus Johnson, Honeycomb, right?
Yeah, he was the dunking machine before people ever remember. Before there was YouTube and all that stuff.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That power forward. Yeah. I wish people would remember him because he was great.
Yeah, it's too bad. Well, again, Wally, I really appreciate you doing this, and let's keep in touch.
I would love that. I appreciate getting to know you.
Oh, that's great, man. Have a good day now.
Okay, Joanne, you too. Thank you.
Everybody, you're welcome.